The storm crashed over Yorkshire like a living, howling beast. Lightning split the sky, thunder bellowed in the hills, and the old stone hunting lodge shook beneath the weight of the wind. Charlotte Ashford, youngest daughter of the late Earl, pressed her back against the oak front door, heart pounding so loud she barely heard the next roar, except this one wasn't thunder. It was a man's shout, guttural, half-mad. She twisted the deadbolt just in time, but heavy footsteps hammered across the gravel, boots slamming into sodden earth. Charlotte, breath ragged, fumbled for her phone. Rain spattered through the mail slot as she tried to type a message. The screen flickered, battery at 3%. There was no signal. Behind her, the fire snapped. In the blur of a second, she saw her reflection in the gilt mirror, pale, wild-eyed, curls escaping her hurried braid. He's here, she thought. Gareth. He found me. Suddenly, the old gate exploded inward with a shriek of tortured hinges. Gareth Locksley's shadow lunged under the security light, rain streaking down his jaw, his face set in the mask she knew too well. Obsession, fury. A crowbar flashed in his fist. With a violent crack, he jammed it between the door and the jamb. "Charlotte, open the door!" "No!" She braced herself, wedged her shoulder beneath the door handle. Splinters flew. The lock groaned. Her eyes darted to the back hall, to the single window above the kitchen sink. But she was too late. Gareth forced his way through with brute strength, the door slamming open so hard it rattled the antlers on the wall. He loomed in the entrance, drenched, a wild animal's madness flickering in his eyes. "You think you can hide from me? All this way for nothing? Charlotte, look at me." She shook her head, voice barely a whisper. "Gareth, please, just leave." He advanced, water streaming off his jacket, boots tracking mud across the Persian rug. The storm outside matched the one inside, both growing more violent by the second. Before Gareth could reach her, a scream echoed from the stables. Midnight Duchess, her horse, her only confidant these past dark months, slammed against the stall door, the frantic clatter of hooves slicing through the chaos. Charlotte caught a glimpse of the mare's black silhouette illuminated by a flash of lightning, the white crown-shaped mark on her forehead glowing for a split second. Midnight's scream grew wilder, as if she too sensed the danger. Gareth, distracted by the commotion, paused for a heartbeat, eyes narrowing. "What the—" Charlotte seized her moment. She dashed past him, boots slipping on the slick floor, nearly losing her footing on the stone threshold. Gareth grabbed at her arm, but she twisted away, his fingers scraping against her sleeve. She stumbled into the storm, cold rain lashing her cheeks. The barn loomed ahead, half shrouded in mist and darkness. She sprinted, lungs burning, Gareth's voice echoing behind her. "Get back here! You can't outrun me!" Her hands shook as she fumbled with the latch, shoving the barn door open. Midnight reared, nostrils flaring, coat glistening wet and wild. The mare's eyes locked on Charlotte, recognizing her even through the chaos. Without a bridle, without a saddle, Charlotte leaped onto Midnight's back, clutching the coarse mane with all her strength. Another flash. Gareth was already in the yard, face twisted, boots splashing through puddles. Midnight screamed again, her hooves striking the muddy ground, and Gareth lunged, trying to block their path. Charlotte gritted her teeth. "Go, girl, please!" As if answering her call, Midnight surged forward, barreling straight at Gareth. He tried to dodge, but the mare's powerful hind legs lashed out, sending him sprawling backwards into the mud with a bone-jarring thud. For a split second, Charlotte looked back. Gareth's face contorted in rage and pain, mud streaking his clothes, hands clawing at the grass. She kicked her heels, and Midnight bolted through the open gate, hooves pounding across the drenched field. The rain battered them, icy needles on Charlotte's skin, but she barely felt it. Every muscle screamed with fear and adrenaline. The lodge shrank behind her, swallowed by the storm. She heard the grinding engine of Gareth's car sputter to life, headlights piercing the dark as he tore after them along the muddy track. Charlotte clung to Midnight's mane, guiding her with knees and willpower alone. The old moor stretched ahead, an endless expanse of wind-lashed grass and stone, rivers cutting through like veins. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, the world going white for a heartbeat. Midnight veered, Charlotte's hands slipping, but she held on, refusing to let go. Gareth's car lurched over the rutted lane, headlights slicing through the rain, growing closer with every jolt. Charlotte risked a glance over her shoulder. The glare blinded her, but she could sense the rage, the obsession bearing down. Midnight's breath was ragged now, foam flecking her black hide, but the mare pushed on, hooves finding desperate purchase in the soggy earth. A sudden drop. The ground dipped, revealing a shallow ravine ahead. Charlotte's heart froze, no way around it. She leaned forward, whispering, "You can do it. Just a little more." Midnight leapt, legs tucking, Charlotte clamping down on the mare's mane with everything she had. For a moment they were flying, storm and fear falling away. Then they landed, stumbling but upright, mud splattering Charlotte's jeans. She looked back. Gareth's car skidded at the edge, tires spinning, trapped by the marshy bank. Charlotte pressed her face into Midnight's wet mane, tears lost in the rain. Not tonight. Not this time. She nudged the mare forward, disappearing into the howling night, toward the wild safety of the hills, and whatever fate waited beyond the storm. The night bled into the moor, every sense sharpening to a blade. Rain lashed Charlotte's face as she leaned into Midnight Duchess's strong neck, feeling every muscle tense beneath the mare's black coat. Each hoofbeat was a thunderclap on soaked earth, echoing her heart's frantic rhythm. The wind whipped harder, tearing at Charlotte's hair and stinging her eyes as they galloped headlong into darkness, every shadow alive with threat. Behind them, Gareth's headlights knifed through the rain, zigzagging across the uneven ground. The engine's roar rose and fell, snarling as the tires spun in slick mud. But the lights kept coming, never faltering, always searching. Charlotte felt her pulse spike. He was gaining. The wild ground was no match for a car's speed, but the moor knew her and Midnight. They had roamed these fields since she was a child, riding out grief and loneliness under wide gray skies. Now, every memory, every path, twisted into fear. A low stone wall loomed out of the darkness, moss slick and crumbling at the edge of the old sheep track. Charlotte urged Midnight forward. "Just a little more, girl. You can do it." Her words lost in the wind. The mare surged up and over the wall with a mighty leap, hooves scattering loose stones. Charlotte ducked low, clutching Midnight's mane, the force of the jump nearly unseating her. She landed hard, jarring her spine, but stayed on, barely breathing. Gareth's car skidded behind, headlights sweeping wildly, tires screeching as he slammed to a stop at the wall. For a moment, Charlotte thought he might try to drive over it, but reason, or maybe luck, prevailed. The engine's growl faded, replaced by a string of curses that vanished in the rain. Charlotte's relief was razor thin. He'd be on foot soon. She pressed her heels to Midnight's sides, urging her up the narrow path that snaked between clumps of gorse and thorn. The mare responded, nostrils flaring, breath steaming in the cold air. The land dropped away to their right, a sudden dip, hidden by shadows. Charlotte's foot slipped from the stirrup, not that she'd had one, her body pitching sideways. For a terrifying moment she hung there, gravity pulling, the edge yawning wide. Her free hand clawed for Midnight's mane, fingers tangling in coarse black hair. The ground rushed up, the world spinning, but she managed to pull herself upright, gasping, legs squeezing tight. Midnight kept running, sure-footed even in the storm, the only thing between Charlotte and disaster. A branch whipped across her cheek, stinging, but she barely noticed. Her phone was a heavy, useless lump in her pocket. She yanked it free, thumb trembling as she unlocked the screen. One bar of signal flickered, wavering in and out. She opened her message app, selected Flo, her oldest friend, the one person who might believe her, who might help. The wind howled, threatening to tear the phone from her grasp. Charlotte typed with numb fingers. Gareth found me. Running. Moor above lodge. Help. Pin. The screen flashed red. Battery at 1%. No! She jammed the send location button, watching as the loading wheel spun. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, mercifully, the little blue checkmark appeared. Message sent. The screen blinked off. Dead. A sob tore itself from her chest, but she swallowed it, focusing on the path ahead. Midnight stumbled, hooves catching on loose rock, but never stopped. Rain poured down, mixing with sweat, turning Charlotte's hair to a sodden mess. Every breath burned. The world shrank to horse and storm and the threat behind. A flicker of light flashed across the hills, a distant farmhouse maybe, or just another trick of the storm. Charlotte guided Midnight away from the open ground, searching for shelter. The mare's pace faltered. She was exhausted, flanks heaving. Charlotte leaned low, whispering, "It's okay, girl, just a little further, please." The words were broken, half prayer, half promise. They crested a rise, the wind suddenly easing as the land flattened. Ahead, half collapsed behind a stand of wind-blown hawthorns, Charlotte spotted the outline of an old stone sheep shelter. Roof mostly intact, walls crumbling but sturdy enough to block the wind. She nudged Midnight forward. The mare slowed, then stepped gratefully beneath the low arch, trembling but standing strong. Charlotte slid to the ground, legs shaking so badly she nearly fell. Her hands ran along Midnight's neck, feeling the powerful heartbeat beneath the wet fur. Safe for now. Just for a moment. She glanced back toward the path. Darkness pressed in from every side, the storm's rage muffled by the thick stone. Charlotte crouched in the shelter, clutching her dead phone, the last trace of warmth fading from her fingertips. Gareth's shouts were distant now, swallowed by wind, but she knew he wasn't gone. He was out there, searching, relentless. She fished a wool blanket from the shelter's forgotten corner, draping it over Midnight's back, then curled up against the mare's side, drawing what comfort she could from the animal's steady presence. Her mind raced, replaying the night in flashes. Gareth's face twisted with anger, the bone-jarring escape, the near fall into the ravine. Her chest tightened at the memory. It could have ended right there. She pressed a hand to her heart, feeling it thud wildly. Time stretched and warped. She wasn't sure how long she waited, minutes, maybe an hour, before headlights swept across the distant ridge. Charlotte's body tensed, eyes searching for the shape of Gareth's car. But these lights were different. Higher, slower, pausing as if searching. Hope flared in her chest. Maybe Flo had gotten her message. Maybe help was closer than she thought. She risked a whisper, "Flo," but the wind snatched the name away. Midnight nickered, her breath warm against Charlotte's hair. The storm raged on, but somewhere out there, hope flickered. Small, fragile, but alive. Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to the mare, her only friend in the storm, waiting for dawn or rescue, whichever came first. Rain beat a relentless rhythm on the roof of the old sheep shelter. But inside, time seemed to slip sideways, memories seeping in through every crack and hollow. Charlotte pressed her forehead to midnight's warm flank, shivering with more than just cold. Her mind, raw and restless, drifted back to London, to light and color, to the hope she once wore like a silk scarf. It felt like a lifetime ago. The sky garden was flooded with early spring sunlight, glass walls glowing, city unfurled beneath her as if promising the world. Her paintings hung in neat rows, cool blues, fierce reds, the wild energy of horses captured mid-stride. Guests circled with champagne flutes and polite admiration. She remembered the thrill of it, the sweet flush in her cheeks as she spoke with critics, collectors, her father's old friends. Her future was laid out before her, brilliant and unpredictable. And that's where she met Gareth. He stood apart from the others, military bearing unmistakable, uniform exchanged for a crisp navy suit. He watched her with a quiet intensity, eyes lingering not on the art, but on her, as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. When he finally approached, his voice was softer than she expected, laced with the accent of Yorkshire and something gentle she couldn't yet name. "Your paintings, they're wild, untamable, like you, maybe." She'd laughed, brushing aside a compliment she didn't quite believe, but there was something magnetic about him. Gareth was different from the men her family paraded in front of her. He was older, his eyes shadowed by stories he didn't share. But he was funny and sharp, quick to draw her out of her own head. He asked real questions about her art, her childhood, the first time she'd ridden bareback across the Dales. They'd walked along the Thames after the show, city lights flickering on the water, wind whipping Charlotte's hair into her eyes. She let herself forget the pressure of her name, the weight of her family's expectations, and just listened as Gareth told stories about his time in the Royal Marines. Some funny, some quietly devastating. There was a loneliness in him that matched her own, and she found herself drawn to it, eager to fill the gaps with laughter, with warmth, with her own restless spirit. The first kiss came beneath a street lamp, laughter tumbling into silence, hands tangled in her curls. She remembered the way he touched her cheek, so careful, as if she might vanish if he wasn't gentle enough. In those days, his strength felt like protection, not a threat. It started simply. Dinners out, late nights tangled in sheets, champagne shared by the window while the city slept. Gareth was attentive, always bringing her little things, sketchbooks, old poetry books, her favorite chocolate. He listened when she talked about her art, about the isolation she sometimes felt. He made her feel seen in a way that was intoxicating. But as weeks slipped by, shadows crept in. Gareth's job changed. He was home more, restless, jumpy. He drank a little more, smiled a little less. Small things began to shift. He'd ask where she was going, who she was with. The questions at first seemed caring, but soon they became insistent, sharp at the edges. "Who was that texting you, Charlotte? Why didn't you answer sooner? You know how much I worry." The first time he lost his temper, It was over something trivial. A call she missed. A night she stayed late at the studio. His voice, once gentle, turned brittle, and he raised it loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Afterwards, he cried, apologizing over and over, swearing it would never happen again. Charlotte wanted to believe him. She remembered how he'd held her after, shaking, as if the world had come apart, and only she could hold it together. But it happened again, and again. The anger grew, unpredictable as thunder. Gareth would be tender one moment, furious the next, jealousy rising over nothing at all. He'd grab her wrist, grip too tight, leave bruises that she'd hide under sweaters. There were nights she'd lock herself in the bathroom, phone pressed to her chest, counting the minutes until he calmed down. "You think you can leave me? No one else will love you like I do. You're mine, Charlotte. Don't forget that." The words wormed their way into her bones, even after she started to pull back, to see the truth for what it was, control, not love. It was hard to imagine a way out. Gareth always knew what to say to reel her back in, always just gentle enough, just sorry enough, to make her doubt herself. Her father died that winter, a heart attack in his sleep. The family fractured. Her sister vanished to France. Her mother drowned in pills and silence. Gareth stepped in, holding her through the funeral, promising he'd protect her, that they were all they needed. But the walls of her world kept shrinking, room by room. One night, after a gallery opening she attended alone, she came home to find Gareth waiting in the dark. He accused her of flirting, of shaming him. The argument escalated, slamming doors, shouting, a glass thrown against the wall. He pinned her against the window, hand at her throat, voice shaking with rage. "You'll never leave me. If you try, I'll find you. I'll make you sorry." That was the moment something in her broke. She waited until he fell asleep, then packed a single bag, sketchbooks, a change of clothes, a framed photo of midnight Duchess when she was a foal. She turned off her phone, left a note for her mother, and took the first train north. Yorkshire was a cold, sharp balm. The lodge felt empty, haunted by memories, but it was safe, quiet. She found solace in routine. Early mornings, hot tea, the rhythm of caring for midnight, hours spent painting in the attic. But Gareth's threats haunted her dreams, even as the days grew longer. Now, huddled against midnight in the shelter, Charlotte pressed her eyes shut, feeling the ache of old wounds. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm she'd already survived. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard a siren, or maybe just the wind. The past pressed in, but Charlotte forced herself to remember the truth. The fear, yes, but also the strength it took to run, to start again. She clung to that memory, to the hope that this time, she wouldn't have to face the darkness alone. Morning arrived as a pale silver glow, filtering through the cracks in the old stone shelter. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold hush, every surface dripping with dew. Charlotte stretched, her muscles aching, feeling the rough wool blanket clinging damply to her shoulders. She drifted into uneasy sleep, cheek pressed to midnight's flank, the steady thrum of the mare's heartbeat anchoring her to the world. As the first rays of daylight reached the moor, Charlotte rose slowly, legs tingling from hours spent curled on the hard ground. Midnight nickered softly, her coat matted but her eyes clear. Charlotte stroked her muzzle, whispering, "Good girl, you saved me." Just like always. Her fingers traced the white crown-shaped patch between the mare's eyes. With careful hands, she untangled bits of thorn from the mare's mane and checked her legs for injuries. Midnight was tired, but strong. Charlotte wrapped the blanket tighter, leading the mare out into the cold, wet dawn. The moor glistened, wild and endless, the hunting lodge a distant shadow on the horizon. For a few moments all was still, just the soft clop of hooves and the breath of wind in the grass. She watched the sky shift from pewter to pale blue, each moment stretching into the next. It was in these quiet spaces that she felt most alive, stripped of memory and fear. By the time they reached the lodge, Charlotte's jeans were soaked to the knee and her hair hung in wet tangles down her back. She led Midnight into the stable, checked the feed, and took extra time to brush the mare's coat until it shone beneath her hands. The barn was filled with the earthy smell of hay and leather, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic chill of her London apartment. Charlotte found comfort in these small rituals, brushing, feeding, listening to the contented snort of her horse. The world beyond the stable faded to a manageable blur. Inside the lodge, the kitchen was cold, but familiar. She set the kettle on the old Aga stove, wrapping her arms around herself as she waited for it to whistle. Her father's favorite mug, chipped and faded, the Ashford crest still barely visible, sat on the counter. She filled it with Earl Grey, the steam curling upward, breathing in the scent until she felt a little steadier. That morning, she did what she always did after a night that threatened to swallow her whole. She painted. In the attic studio, light poured in through the narrow dormer windows, illuminating canvases propped haphazardly against every wall. The room was cluttered with half-finished sketches and paint-splattered rags, a chaos that somehow soothed her nerves. She chose a piece of chalk and went out to the barn, tracing broad, swift lines across the blackboard wall she'd installed last month. Horses appeared beneath her hands, manes whipping, muscles taut, eyes wild and alive. It was movement, freedom, a reminder that she still possessed something no one, not even Gareth, could ever take. Hours slipped by unnoticed. It was only when the low ring of her phone vibrated through the silence that Charlotte startled, dropping her chalk. The message was from Flo, her best friend since boarding school, now managing a community art center in Richmond. Flo's texts always arrived in bursts, full of warmth and exclamation points. Saw your location ping last night. Gave me a heart attack. Are you okay? Call me Lottie, please. Charlotte smiled despite herself. She could almost hear Flo's voice, equal parts concern and mischief. She texted back, safe, long story, I'll call soon. But before she could put the phone down, another message popped up. Random, but would you be willing to teach a few art classes at the Community Art Hub? We're starting a pilot program for local kids, especially the ones who've lost parents or had a rough time lately. You'd be perfect. Think about it. Charlotte let the message linger on the screen. The idea tugged at something deep inside her, part longing, part dread. She'd shut herself away for so long, painting only for herself, speaking to no one but Midnight and the occasional delivery driver. The thought of returning to a classroom, of letting others see her, see the cracks and bruises she still carried, was terrifying. But there was also a flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't the only one who needed healing. That afternoon, after tea and toast, she pulled on her father's old Barber jacket and walked the mile to the edge of the property, the cold air biting her cheeks. The world felt larger here, each step away from the lodge a quiet rebellion. By the time she reached the public footpath that skirted the village, her mind was clearer. In Richmond, the streets were dotted with bunting and the buzz of daily life. Kids racing down the cobbles, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, the church bells marking time. Charlotte ducked her head as she passed, still half ghost to herself. The community art hub sat in a converted schoolhouse at the end of the main street, its windows bright with posters and children's artwork. Flo met her at the door, arms thrown wide, voice booming. "There's my favorite Ashford! Come in, before you freeze!" Charlotte laughed, letting herself be swept inside. The building was warm, filled with the scent of paint, glue, and childhood chaos. Colorful murals climbed every wall. Children's laughter spilled from the art room. Flo poured 2 mugs of strong Yorkshire tea and led her to a sunlit corner. They sat, knees bumping, the old friendship sparking between them like flint and steel. "You know, Lottie, I could use you here. Some of these kids, they've seen too much sadness. They don't need perfect teachers. They need people who get it, people who survived their own storms." Charlotte studied her hands, paint still under her fingernails. She wanted to say no, to retreat to the comfort of solitude. But Flo's hope was infectious. Maybe she could help. Maybe by helping them, she could help herself. She nodded just once. "All right, Flo. I'll do it. I'll try." As they planned out the first lesson, Charlotte felt something shift inside. A fragile new beginning. The first true breath after a long, suffocating silence. The next Monday dawned cold and bright, the kind of Yorkshire morning that made the world look scrubbed clean. Charlotte woke before sunrise, nerves fluttering in her stomach, and lingered in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of Earl Grey. She listened to the quiet, trying to find calm in the familiar sounds of the old lodge, the low creak of settling timbers, the distant clatter of midnight Duchess pawing in her stall. She let herself rest in that peace for just a moment, then gathered her bag, a bundle of brushes, and a stack of blank sketch pads. She wore her favorite paint-flecked sweater, one she'd never dared to bring out in London. There, it would have looked careless. Here, it felt like armor. The walk into Richmond was crisp and solitary, dew sparkling on the hedgerows, sun warming her cheeks as she crossed the fields. She moved quietly, heart thumping, replaying every detail of Flo's text invitation. Teaching a group of kids, most of them strangers, was a leap into the unknown. She reminded herself, if you can survive Gareth, you can survive this. Still, her hands shook as she reached the bright blue door of the community art hub. Flo was already inside, bustling from table to table, sleeves rolled, hair wild as ever. She greeted Charlotte with a hug that squeezed all the air from her lungs. "You came. I knew you would." They're all so excited. Or at least, most of them are. Charlotte forced a smile, hiding her nerves, and followed Flo into the sunlit main room. It was an explosion of color. Murals on every wall, handprints, clay animals, lopsided rainbows. 10 children, aged from 7 to 11, were already seated in a wide semicircle, eyes wide and curious. Some looked eager, others guarded. At one table, a small girl with tightly braided hair sat apart, arms folded, her gaze fixed on the window. "This is Charlotte," Flo announced. "She's not just a painter, she's a horse whisperer too. Ask her anything about art or Midnight Duchess." A few of the children smiled or giggled. Charlotte introduced herself, voice steady despite her racing heart. She shared a quick story about Midnight, how the mare had once eaten an entire basket of apples meant for a village fair. Laughter rippled across the room, easing some of the tension. The lesson began. Charlotte passed out paper and pencils, telling the kids to draw anything they loved. No rules, no right answers. She wandered among them, offering encouragement, showing how to shade a cloud, or make a horse look like it was galloping right off the page. Her own hands felt less shaky as she worked, the familiar rhythm returning. But the girl at the window, Daisy, didn't draw. She stared out, fingers clenched in her lap. Charlotte knelt beside her, careful not to crowd. "You don't have to draw if you don't want," Charlotte said softly. "But if you want to just sit with me, that's okay too." Daisy looked at her, eyes large and guarded, as if weighing the safety of this stranger. Her answer was silence, but she didn't move away. Charlotte sat quietly, sketchbook open on her knees, and began to draw midnight. She let the lines flow, capturing the sweep of mane, the proud lift of the mare's head. She painted with colored pencils, blues and greens, letting the image bloom slowly. Other children drifted over, curious to see. One asked if midnight could really run faster than a car. Another wanted to know if horses got scared in thunderstorms. Charlotte answered gently, telling them how midnight would nuzzle her shoulder whenever lightning struck, how horses, like people, felt fear but could be brave too. After a while, Daisy's eyes dropped to the page. She watched Charlotte's hands, not the drawing itself. Hesitantly, Daisy reached for a pencil, her small hand trembling. Charlotte slid the box of colors closer, never breaking her flow. "You can use any color you like," she murmured. "Even blue horses are allowed here." For a long time, Daisy just sat, eyes flicking from the pencils to the window and back again. Then, as the other children began to finish their pictures, birds, trees, messy families, Daisy picked up a deep teal pencil. She pressed it softly to the paper, making the lightest of marks. At first, only a shadow, a suggestion of a mane, a curving neck. But slowly, her lines grew more confident. By the time the session was nearly over, Daisy had drawn a small, proud horse, outlined in trembling green. Charlotte watched from the corner of her eye, careful not to intrude. When Daisy looked up at her, Charlotte smiled, a warm, quiet smile that spoke volumes. "That's beautiful," she said softly. Midnight would be jealous. For the first time, Daisy's lips twitched in the smallest smile. She glanced away, cheeks coloring, but left her drawing on the table instead of hiding it away. Charlotte felt a wave of hope rise in her chest, fragile but real. The rest of the afternoon passed in gentle rhythms. Children wandered in and out, sharing stories, showing their art. Poppy, a shy girl with huge eyes and tangled hair, drew a house with no people in it, just a window and a yellow cat. She sat beside Daisy, not speaking, but close enough that their elbows almost touched. As the day ended, parents and caretakers began to arrive, collecting children and praising messy, vibrant art. Daisy stayed until the last, waiting quietly by the door. Before she left, she turned back to Charlotte, eyes still unsure. "Will you be here next time?" Charlotte's throat tightened. She nodded. "Yes, I promise." Outside, the sky was darkening, clouds piling up on the horizon. Charlotte watched Daisy disappear into the crowd, then packed up her brushes with hands that felt light, almost new. She walked home beneath a sky streaked with fading gold, hope flickering within her, a small, steady light, burning against the coming night. Evenings in Yorkshire fell quietly, with the sun sinking behind rolling hills and the shadows stretching long over the grass. For days after her first art class at the community hub, Charlotte settled into a fragile rhythm. Mornings spent painting in the stable with midnight, afternoons guiding children's hands through colors and shapes, and nights curled in bed, listening to the wind in the old lodge's chimneys. For the first time in months, she caught herself humming in the kitchen, letting her mind wander to what she might teach Daisy and Poppy next. Each day, she felt the knot in her chest loosen just a little more, but peace was always edged with worry. Gareth's threat still lingered, a shadow that seemed to slip through the cracks of her new life. Charlotte kept her phone close, checking messages from Flo and glancing at the old brass clock in the hall every hour, as if waiting for something to shatter her calm. One evening, after a day that felt almost normal, Charlotte returned home late, her boots muddy from the walk across the fields. The sky was bruised with rain clouds, the air sharp and full of the promise of another storm. She led Midnight into her stall, brushed the mare's coat with long, even strokes, then lingered, reluctant to return to the empty lodge. Eventually, she slipped inside, the old stone walls closing around her with a comforting chill. She set the kettle boiling, poured a splash of milk in her favorite mug, and glanced out the kitchen window. The yard was empty, just the gravel drive and the wind-blown trees. She forced herself to breathe, to relax her shoulders. She'd survived worse. Still, a shiver ran through her, and she pulled her father's jacket tighter around her. She nearly missed it at first, a faint smear of red against the gray stone steps outside the back door. Charlotte frowned, stepping closer. Marlboro, a cigarette butt mashed out in the rain, the paper swollen and streaked with mud. Her breath caught in her throat. No one in the house smoked. She'd quit herself years ago, and neither the stable hands nor Flo ever brought cigarettes here. She stooped, fingers trembling, and picked it up. Rain had washed away most of the ash, but the shape and filter were unmistakable. Marlboro Reds, Gareth's brand. She'd watched him light 100 of them with shaking hands after nightmares in London. The smell burned into her memory. Charlotte dropped the butt as if it might bite her, her mind spinning. That's when she noticed the footprints, deep imprints in the damp grass leading away from the kitchen door, the tread wide and heavy, too large for her or any of the farm staff. The pattern was familiar. Army boots, thick-soled, the kind Gareth wore when they hiked together along the Thames path, before everything turned dark. Charlotte's heart raced. She backed away from the window, every instinct telling her not to make a sound. For a moment, she simply stood there, clutching her mug, ears straining for the creak of a floorboard or the jingle of the old garden gate. Nothing but the wind. She spent the next hour checking every window, making sure each lock was fastened, every curtain drawn tight. In the living room, she slipped her hand under the sofa and drew out the old polo mallet her father once used for summer tournaments. Polished wood, heavy in her grip. It wasn't a weapon, but it was something. A small piece of her past to hold on to. She placed it by the side of her bed that night, fingers tracing the worn leather handle until sleep finally dragged her under. But her dreams were uneasy, full of muffled footsteps and the acrid scent of cigarette smoke. She woke more than once, heart hammering, listening for the whisper of Gareth's voice. Each time, the silence pressed back, thick and unforgiving. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly. Charlotte moved through her routine in a daze, her mind circling around the cigarette butt and those footprints. She considered calling Flo, but something held her back. A mix of pride and shame, the stubborn refusal to seem fragile. Instead, she scribbled down the details in her sketchbook, as if naming them would lessen their power. When she arrived at the hub later that morning, Flo was waiting by the door, concern etched on her face. "You all right, Lottie? You look like you saw a ghost." Charlotte forced a smile, shaking off the question. "Just didn't sleep well, that's all. Too much rain, not enough tea. Flo didn't push, but she watched Charlotte closely all day, eyes soft with worry. Inside the art room, the children gathered around, eager for the new lesson. Charlotte drew horses with wild manes and invited them to paint with their hands, smearing color across the paper, turning fear into laughter. Daisy surprised her by choosing bright green for her next horse, her strokes bold and confident. Even Poppy, usually quiet and withdrawn, offered Charlotte a shy, gap-toothed grin. The warmth of their trust gave Charlotte strength. She listened to their stories, Daisy's memories of her mother, Poppy's stories about a cat she'd once had, and realized she wasn't alone. The children's wounds mirrored her own. Healing, she realized, was not a solitary act. It required others, even if the risk of pain remained. After the lesson, as Charlotte walked home beneath a low, clouded sky, she kept glancing back over her shoulder, scanning the hedgerows and stone walls for movement. Each shadow seemed to flicker with possibility. Yet when she reached the lodge, it was as she'd left it, silent, untouched, the only sound the distant call of a nightbird. Still, she double-checked the doors before bed and propped the polo mallet within reach. That night, when sleep came, it was lighter and restless, but it came nonetheless. Somewhere in her dreams, midnight ran beside her, swift and strong, always moving forward, carrying Charlotte away from darkness and into the thin, blue light of hope. The next morning, a raw wind cut across the fields, and Charlotte woke with an ache in her chest that no amount of tea could dissolve. She made herself eat a piece of toast, forcing her mind away from the phantom footsteps and cigarette smoke. When Flo's message arrived just after 7, "Can I come by?" Charlotte typed yes without thinking, grateful for company, for any distraction from the fear that had settled like dust in the corners of the old lodge. Flo arrived in a flurry of energy, boots caked with mud, a bundle of files, and her ever-present thermos of coffee in hand. She took one look at Charlotte's pale face and the polo mallet leaning against the door and didn't even try for small talk. "All right, spill it. What's happened?" Charlotte let it all tumble out. The cigarette butt, the footprints, the restless nights, the sense that Gareth was never far, always watching. Flo listened, jaw clenched, worry deepening in her eyes. "I don't like this, Lottie. We need to do more than lock the doors and wait." They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from their mugs, and for the first time since Charlotte's flight from London, they talked about Gareth openly, no longer pretending the past could be safely buried. Flo asked questions. Had Gareth contacted her again? Was there anyone else who might know where she was? Charlotte shook her head, feeling the familiar tangle of dread and shame. "He always finds a way," she whispered. "He always said he would." Flo reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Not this time." That afternoon, Flo made a call to her cousin, Detective Lisa Robson of North Yorkshire Police. Lisa arrived before sunset, tall and broad-shouldered, with calm eyes and a habit of scanning every window as she spoke. She listened without judgment, taking notes in a small, battered notebook. When Charlotte described Gareth's patterns, his jealousy, his threats, the escalating violence, Lisa nodded, her mouth tightening. "We've seen men like him before. They don't just give up, but that's not your burden to carry alone." Lisa explained that without hard evidence, Gareth couldn't be arrested simply for lurking, but she could advise and support. She suggested a plan. Bait Gareth out, create a digital breadcrumb trail to make him show himself, and use the police's resources to catch him in the act. "We can set a trap, but it's risky. Are you willing to do this?" Charlotte hesitated. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to disappear again into the shadows. But something in her, maybe the courage that survived the darkest nights in London, maybe the steadying presence of midnight and the children, made her nod. She was tired of running. "Let's do it," she said, her voice trembling but sure. That evening, in the warm glow of the kitchen, Flo and Lisa helped Charlotte create a new Instagram account, A Lost in London. They filled it with photos, old shots of Charlotte's artwork, a few staged glimpses of London landmarks, all carefully curated to hint that she'd gone back to the city. Charlotte's hands shook as she wrote the first post. Sometimes the only way forward is to start over. Fresh start. London nights. Flo added location tags, and Lisa helped set privacy so they could track any suspicious activity. Within an hour, Gareth's username popped up in the followers. Then came the barrage of messages, at first pleading, then desperate, finally furious. His words scrolled across Charlotte's phone in a relentless stream. "Charlotte, please, just talk to me. I need to see you. Give me a chance. I promise things will be different. Just one more chance." Charlotte's heart pounded as she read them, the words almost familiar. The cycle she'd come to know so well, regret, anger, manipulation, always circling back to control. Lisa watched over her shoulder, jotting notes, marking timestamps. "He's hooked. This is our chance." The next step was harder. Charlotte had to answer. She steeled herself, fingers hovering over the keyboard, channeling all her old anxiety into one perfectly balanced response. "I'll meet you once. No promises, just to talk. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., the gas station by the A6108. After that, leave me alone," Gareth replied instantly, a string of emojis and needy declarations. "Thank you. I knew you still cared. Don't bring anyone. Just you. I'll be there. I love you." The sick sense of dread returned, but Charlotte let Lisa and Flo take over, coordinating with local officers, setting up surveillance. The next 24 hours moved like a fever dream. The police set up cameras in an abandoned mailbox across from the gas station, another hidden in a streetlight. Plainclothes officers would be stationed behind the hedge, a K9 unit waiting in a nearby van. Flo insisted on coming, disguised in a hoodie, determined to watch over Charlotte. Lisa outfitted Charlotte with a tiny microphone, the wire tucked into her scarf, instructions clear. "If anything goes wrong, say, 'It's colder than I thought.'" That was the code. When the time came, Charlotte dressed simply, blending into the drab twilight, every movement rehearsed in her mind. She looked at herself in the mirror before leaving, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. There was fear, yes, but also steel, a new determination forged by months of survival. The drive to the gas station was silent except for the rain tapping the windshield. Flo squeezed her hand once, then slipped out to take her place behind the hedge. Charlotte waited in the empty lot, heart racing, breath coming in shallow bursts. A pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the lot, cutting through the gloom. Gareth's car, she recognized it instantly, the dent in the bumper, the cheap air freshener hanging from the mirror. He parked, engine idling, and stepped out, scanning the darkness, his figure bulkier and even more haunted than she remembered. Charlotte forced herself to stand tall. Gareth called her name, Charlotte, his voice cracking, desperate, angry, afraid. She felt every muscle in her body tense, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she held her ground, hands buried in her pockets, mic live, police hidden all around. "You came," Gareth said, stepping closer, his eyes darting left and right. You really came." Charlotte nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to talk." Lightning flickered in the distance, thunder rolling low. Gareth's face twisted, hope and rage warring inside him. He reached out as if to touch her, but Charlotte stepped back, just enough, holding her nerve. She waited for the signal, Lisa's words in her ear, Flo's promise echoing in her heart. As Gareth's hand curled into a fist, Charlotte took a breath and spoke the code. "It's colder than I thought." In an instant, blue lights blazed across the lot. Officers pouring from the shadows, shouts cracking the air. Gareth spun, confusion melting into fury as a police dog lunged, knocking him to the ground. He thrashed, screaming her name, his cries swallowed by the pounding rain and the surge of relief flooding Charlotte's veins. It was over, or almost over. But in that moment, Charlotte felt the weight of every nightmare finally begin to lift. Hope shining through, brighter than the lightning splitting the sky. The world seemed to splinter in that moment, the gas station lot erupting in a chaos of blue and red light, rain pouring in sheets, every sense heightened to the point of pain. Charlotte stood frozen, breath caught between a gasp and a scream, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst. Gareth's face twisted in the strobing lights, eyes wild with something halfway between love and hatred, arms flailing as the police dog barreled into him, knocking him flat on his back. Officers swarmed around them, shouts and commands blending with the storm. Gareth kicked out blindly, roaring her name, Charlotte, again and again, a guttural, desperate sound that echoed off the wet pavement and bounced inside her skull. The memory of his hands on her throat, his voice in her ear, flashed behind her eyes. "You'll never leave me, Charlotte, never." And for a single, dizzying second, she thought she might faint. But then Flo's arm was around her, steady and real, voice urgent but gentle. "Come on, Lottie, let's get you out of here, come on." Charlotte stumbled, letting herself be half-dragged away from the swirling chaos, her vision tunneling, ears ringing with the aftermath of adrenaline. She let herself collapse against Flo's shoulder behind the police van, the cold metal biting through her coat. The rain washed away her tears before she could even feel them. Gareth's shouts grew fainter as he was pinned to the ground, wrists wrenched behind his back, cuffs snapping shut with a finality that echoed through the parking lot. Even then, he didn't stop, rage spilling out in curses and promises, his voice raw and broken. For a moment, Charlotte thought he might break free, might rise up out of the mud and reign one last time. But he didn't. He was just a man, beaten, small beneath the weight of law and consequence. Police radios crackled with terse updates. Lisa appeared, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her face but eyes shining with grim satisfaction. She crouched beside Charlotte, touching her shoulder. "He's done, Charlotte. You did everything right. We've got it all on camera, on tape. He won't hurt you again." Charlotte tried to nod, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her mind replayed everything in slow motion. The headlights, the words, the way Gareth's eyes had pleaded with her even as his fists clenched. Was it pity she felt? Or relief? Or just the empty numbness of survival? Flo pressed a paper cup of coffee into her hands, the heat seeping into her frozen fingers. Around them, the storm raged on, sirens wailing through the night as more officers arrived, securing the scene. Charlotte could barely process any of it, her thoughts drifting to the children at the hub, to midnight Duchess in her stall, to the hollow silence that had filled her life for so long. The police walked Gareth past her on his way to the van. For an instant, his eyes locked on hers, red-rimmed, furious, begging for something she couldn't give. He spat a final, desperate curse. You're nothing without me." But Charlotte didn't flinch. She just stared, steady and unblinking, until he was gone. A sudden tremor ran through her. She gripped Flo's hand, grounding herself in the present, forcing herself to breathe, to feel the rain, the mud, the bruises that would blossom across her arms tomorrow. She was here. She was safe, and Gareth was gone. After the police finished their questions and statements, Lisa offered to drive them home. The car was warm and dark, the radio playing low, a comforting blanket over the exhaustion that weighed Charlotte down. She watched the familiar streets of Richmond slip by, each shop and lamplight a reminder of the life she was fighting to reclaim. Flo broke the silence with a sigh, her tone soft and proud. "You did it, Lottie. You did it." Charlotte let herself smile, small and tired but real. "I couldn't have done it without you." The lodge glowed in the darkness, lights blazing as they pulled up the drive. Midnight wickered in her stall, sensing Charlotte's return. Lisa walked the property with her, double-checking locks, making sure every window was secure. Charlotte moved through the motions, the adrenaline fading now, leaving her limbs leaden. When they were finally alone, Flo made tea and Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, staring into the swirling steam. She felt the aftershocks, the way her body shook in tiny, involuntary spasms. Flo sat beside her, close but not smothering, letting Charlotte find her own way back to herself. Outside, the rain slowed. The world settled. Charlotte got up and went to the stable, pressing her face against Midnight's warm neck, letting the mare's breath anchor her once more. "You saved me," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you either." Midnight nuzzled her, and for the first time in months, Charlotte didn't flinch from the touch. Sleep came late, uneasy but deeper than before. She dreamed not of running, not of fear, but of green hills and children's laughter, of paint on her hands and the promise of a sunrise yet to come. When she woke, there was a new stillness in the house, a quiet that was peaceful, not empty. Gareth was gone, and in his place was space. Space to breathe, to heal, to begin again. As dawn crept through the curtains, Charlotte sat by the window with a fresh cup of tea, watching the light spill across the fields. There would be questions, courtrooms, wounds to tend. But the future stretched before her, wide and unknown, and for the first time, she was not afraid. York was shrouded in autumn drizzle the morning of the trial, the old city walls rising pale and somber beneath a bruised sky. Charlotte sat in the back seat of Flo's car as they crept through the winding streets toward Crown Court. Her hands clasped in her lap, knuckles white. Every turn brought another pang of dread. What if Gareth was already inside? What if his family blamed her? What if the law failed and she had to live with the threat of his shadow forever? Flo reached over, squeezed her fingers. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "I'll be right outside the whole time." Charlotte nodded, swallowing hard, then turned her face to the rain-spattered window, watching the city drift by. It was all so quiet. For a moment she envied the rush of ordinary life. Students on bikes, pensioners clutching their groceries, the steam from a bakery drifting into the street. She wondered if she would ever feel so anonymous again. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights flickered and footsteps echoed on the stone floors. A kind-faced clerk showed her to a waiting room and then to the witness box, where she sat with her palms pressed to her knees and waited. She tried to remember what Lisa and the victim's advocate had told her. Deep breaths. Look at the judge. Speak your truth. Her mouth was dry, her chest tight. When Gareth was led in, Charlotte felt a chill crawl up her spine. He wore a borrowed suit, wrinkled and ill-fitting, his hair cut too short, eyes bloodshot. He didn't look at her. Instead, he stared at the floor, jaw set, hands twisting in his lap. For a moment, she almost didn't recognize him. Not the monster who haunted her nightmares, not the man who once traced lines down her cheek and recited poetry in bed. Just someone broken, hunched, swallowed by his own darkness. The judge called for silence. The charges were read. Charlotte listened as the prosecution outlined her story. Months of threats, escalation, the night in the moor, the ambush at the gas station. Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she expected. She described Gareth's violence, the years of fear, the escape, the long road north. She spoke of the children at the art hub, of midnight Duchess, of her hope for peace. Sometimes her words faltered, catching on old pain, but she pushed on, willing herself to see this through. Gareth's lawyer argued for leniency. He brought up Gareth's service, the trauma of war, his honorable discharge. Gareth looked up just once, eyes finding Charlotte's. There was no hatred there, only emptiness, something hollowed out by regret and years of pain. For a moment, Charlotte almost pitied him, but she held her ground, refusing to let compassion cloud the truth. The damage he'd done could never be undone. The judge listened, thoughtful and grave. After a pause, she delivered her decision. Gareth would not go to prison, but to a secure psychiatric hospital, under court order for intensive treatment and rehabilitation. He would be monitored and only released when the professionals deemed it truly safe. The gavel struck. It was done. Charlotte's relief was jagged, incomplete, a victory edged in sadness. There was no celebration, no triumph, only a release of breath she'd been holding for years. Afterward, she stood in the hall, the hush of the old building settling around her. Gareth's mother approached, a gray-haired woman with trembling hands and tired eyes. She paused, unsure, then spoke quietly. "Thank you for not hating him," she said. "I know what he's done. I'm so sorry." Charlotte nodded, feeling tears rise, but she blinked them away. "I just want us all to heal," she replied. "I hope he gets help. I hope you do too." They shook hands, a brief, fragile moment of understanding between two women bound by pain and hope. For the first time, Charlotte felt the first real spark of forgiveness. Maybe not for Gareth, but for herself, for surviving, for choosing not to be consumed by bitterness. Flo hugged her tight when she returned to the waiting area, relief and pride in every line of her face. "You did it," she whispered. "You're free." The drive home was quiet, the city giving way to wide fields and open sky. Charlotte stared out the window, letting the countryside unspool around her, every mile carrying her further from the past. By the time they reached the lodge, the clouds had broken, a shaft of sunlight glinting on the wet grass. That evening, Charlotte sat on the stone steps outside the stable, the cool air filled with the smell of rain and hay. Midnight Duchess nuzzled her shoulder, gentle and insistent. Charlotte buried her fingers in the mare's thick mane, letting the silence settle deep in her bones. She thought of Daisy and Poppy, of the children finding color again after loss. She thought of Flo, of the art room bright with laughter and mess, of the promise she'd made to herself to keep moving forward. She didn't know what the future would hold, what scars would linger, what joys might come. But she knew she could face it. One breath, one brush stroke, one sunrise at a time. As night crept in, She lit a lantern by the barn door, the glow spilling out into the darkness, a promise to herself and to anyone still lost on the moor. There is always a way back to the light. 3 months passed, and spring returned to the Yorkshire dales with quiet insistence. The land woke slowly, hills softening beneath a haze of green, birdsong threading through the cool air at dawn. At the Ashford Lodge, windows stood open to let in the light, and laughter echoed where silence once lived. Charlotte moved through her days with a sense of wonder, every small task tinged with gratitude. Feeding midnight Duchess at sunrise, rinsing brushes in the kitchen sink, listening to the creak and sigh of the old house settling into itself again. The lodge, once haunted by memory, was transformed. Charlotte had written to local charities, to Flo's network of artists and teachers, and together they'd built something new: the Ashford Equine Art Retreat. Children from Richmond and beyond came each week, some by bus, others in battered old cars with grandmothers and foster parents. They brought stories of lost parents, of homesickness, of fear, and left slowly with paint under their fingernails and hope blooming in their eyes. Every morning began in the stables. Charlotte would greet the children as they arrived, showing each how to approach midnight Duchess with gentle hands and a calm voice. The mare seemed to understand her new role. She stood patient as small, eager hands brushed her coat, braided her mane, whispered secrets into her velvety ears. For children who flinched at sudden noises or shied away from touch, midnight was a balm, her steady presence grounding them in the moment. Daisy, once so withdrawn she barely spoke, was now the unofficial leader. She showed Poppy how to fill the water buckets and taught the youngest kids to braid yarn into colorful halters. Charlotte watched with pride as Daisy's confidence grew, her laughter ringing out as she led midnight around the paddock, never afraid. Inside, the old dining hall had been transformed into a studio. Sunlight poured through high windows, falling across long tables scattered with paints, pencils, and half-finished canvases. The walls were covered with the children's art: wild horses galloping through blue meadows, sunflowers as tall as trees, family portraits where no one was left out. Charlotte taught not just technique, but freedom. There were no grades, no wrong answers. She watched as Daisy coaxed color from Poppy, as shy boys and bold girls alike found their voices in line and pigment. One Saturday, the village hosted its annual spring fair. Charlotte and Flo bundled the children's best paintings into frames and set up a booth on the green, right next to the cake stall and the sheepdog demonstration. Daisy and Poppy stood behind the table, proudly explaining their work to anyone who stopped to look. A group of older women from the parish bought 3 pictures, one of midnight, one of a bright red tractor, and a third that Daisy had painted of the lodge itself, all gold stone and climbing roses. By afternoon, the retreat's booth was one of the busiest in the fair. Parents stopped by to marvel at how much their children had changed, how Daisy smiled now, how Poppy spoke up when spoken to, how even the quietest boys could talk for ages about the horses or the colors they'd used. Charlotte felt her heart swell with something bright and fierce. When the fair ended, she gathered the children beneath the old oak tree on the edge of the green. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling their faces. She knelt beside Daisy and Poppy, beaming. "You did this," she said. "You made something beautiful, and you shared it with the world. I hope you're proud of yourselves, because I'm proud of you." Daisy grinned, missing tooth and all, and Poppy squeezed Charlotte's hand. "Will we come back next week?" Charlotte laughed. "Every week. As long as you want. That night, when the last of the families had gone and the lodge was quiet, Charlotte stood in the stable, stroking Midnight's nose. The mare snorted softly, content, her eyes half closed. "We made it, girl," Charlotte whispered. "We're really here." She thought back to the storm, the terror of running through the night, Gareth's shadow stretching over every thought. Now those memories were just that, memories. The fear was not gone, but it no longer ruled her. She had faced Gareth, faced the past, and walked forward into something new. Later, she sat at her desk and opened her laptop, recording a video for the retreat's website and the Art Hub's social pages. She smiled into the camera, the words coming more easily than she'd expected. If you ever find yourself trapped in the dark, if you feel lost, afraid, like there's no way out, remember, there's always hope. Sometimes, all it takes is a leap of faith, or a friend, or the touch of a gentle horse, to find your way back to the light. I want you to know you're never alone, and if you ever need a place to heal, you're welcome here, always. She ended with a gentle call to action, inviting viewers to like, share, and subscribe, but also asking a question she hoped would linger. Has anyone or anything ever helped you out of the darkness? Share your story with us. You never know who you might inspire. The video posted, Charlotte went back outside. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky. The air smelled of grass and rain, and somewhere an owl called, soft and distant. She stood for a long time on the threshold, feeling the hush settle inside her. There would always be pain, always struggle, but there was also this: connection, belonging, the gentle certainty that life could begin again. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, feeling herself rooted to the earth, stronger than before. In the quiet before sleep, Charlotte dreamed not of running, but of riding, wind in her hair, Midnight's hooves beating steady and true. And when the sun rose the next morning, spilling gold across the hills, she welcomed it with open arms, ready for whatever came next.